Jurassic Park is one of the greatest science fiction dinosaur movies of all time, but what some people don't realize is that the film is actually based on a book by acclaimed author Michael Crichton. In a world where adaptations are criticized and people complain about changes and shout, "The book was better," somehow Jurassic Park stands alone as one of the most universally loved book adaptations ever. To explain what makes Jurassic Park so unique, I turn to the works of two experts on film adaptation, Linda Cahir and Robert Stam. Through their views on film adaptation, I believe I found the answer. Jurassic Park is a radical adaptation that moves beyond the concerns of fidelity to tell the same story in a unique way that still adheres to the core of the source material. In The Nature of Film Translation by Linda Cahir, the author explains her views on film adaptation and how rather than adaptations, films like Jurassic Park should be viewed as translations. And I quote, "The first step to exploring the merits of literature-based film is to see them as translations of the source material and to understand the difference between adaptation and translation. To adapt is to move the same entity into a new environment. To translate, in contrast to adapt, is to move a text from one language to another. It is a process of language, not a process of survival and generation." This tells us that Cahir prefers to view book-based films as translations rather than adaptations, which is a major distinction. With adaptation, it's expected for the same details to carry over to film in the same way, but translations leave room open for change. It allows things to get lost in translation. Under Cahir's ideas of translation, she explains that there are three distinct types of translations. According to Cahir, there are three translation modes. The first is literal translation, which reproduces the plot and all its attending details as closely as possible to the letter of the book. The second mode is traditional translation, which maintains the overall traits of the book, such as plot, setting, and stylistic conventions, but revamps particular details in those particular ways that the filmmaker sees as necessary and fitting. The third and final mode is radical translation, which reshapes the book in extreme and revolutionary ways, both as a means of interpreting the literature and of making the film a more fully independent work. Along with those three modes of translation, there is one more significant takeaway from Cahir's book, and that is the idea of story cores. Or, as Cahir puts it, there is a core, stable text which the film can steadfastly translate instead of an infinite number of ways of reading of any one work. Basically, in all stories being translated, there's a core that remains fixed and unchanged. Any detail can change in translation, but not the core, which could be viewed as the identity or soul of the story. Robert Stam, in his book Beyond Fidelity, The Dialogics of Adaptation, takes a particularly different stance on film adaptation, but one that is still significant for this analysis. According to Stam, the notion of the fidelity of an adaptation to its source novel does contain a grain of truth. When we say an adaptation has been unfaithful to the original, the term gives expression to the disappointment we feel when a film adaptation fails to capture what we see as the fundamental narrative, thematic, and aesthetic feature of its literary source. But the particular persuasiveness of fidelity should not lead us to endorse it as an exclusive methodological principle. The question of fidelity ignores the wider question. Fidelity to what? Is the filmmaker to be faithful to the plot in its every detail? That might mean a 30-hour version of War and Peace. Virtually all filmmakers condense the events of the novel being adapted, if only to conform to the norms of conventional theatrical release. So on one side we have Cahir, who believes in translation rather than adaptation, and that all stories have a core that does not change when translated. And on the other side, we have Stam, who believes that changes in adaptations should be expected and that the idea of a 100% adaptation from book to film is impossible, and that no detail is exempt from the translation. Now that we've established the ideas of Cohere and Stam, let's see how it applies to Jurassic Park. Cohere isn't explicit as to what the core of a story is, whether it's plot, character, or thematic based, but I believe the novel has two potential cores, but the one that I believe is the true core is the moral philosophy. One of the biggest themes of both versions of the story is the theme of man playing God and then suffering for their arrogance. In the book, I believe this is best exemplified by John Hammond's death scene. Spoilers, Hammond dies in the book. Certainly, he had plenty of reasons to live, other parks to build, other wonders to create. He heard a squeaking, then a chittering sound. Compies, he thought with a chill. He had not gone more than 10 feet when one of the compies jumped onto his back. He flung his arms wildly, knocking the animal away, but he lost his balance and slid back down the hillside. He raised his head as another compy jumped onto his chest, the animal surprisingly light and delicate. Hammond felt only a slight pain, very slight, as the compy bent to chew his neck. John Hammond, in his arrogance, created dinosaurs and believed he had control over them, but in the end, he was a creator destroyed by his own creation. The film also communicates the moral philosophies that are present in the book and how man has no idea what it's dealing with by creating dinosaurs. Let's look at the scene that I believe best exemplifies those themes.
Close-up look at our majestic...
None of these attractions are ready yet, of course, but the park will open with the basic tour you're about to take. And then other rides will come online 6 or 12 months after that. Absolutely spectacular designs, spared no expense.
And we can charge anything we want, $2,000 a day, $10,000 a day, and people will pay it. And then there's the merchandise. And I can personally...
Donald, this park was not built to cater only for the super rich. Everyone in the world has the right to enjoy these animals.
Sure, they will. I mean, what, we'll have a coupon day or something.
Yes.
Gee, the lack of humility before nature that's being displayed here staggers me.
Well, thank you, Dr. Malcolm, but I think things are a little bit different than you and I had feared.
Yeah, I know. They're a lot worse.
Now, wait a second. Now, we haven't even seen the part where
Donald, let him talk. There's no reason. No, I want to hear every viewpoint. I really do.
Yeah, don't you see the danger, John, inherent in what you're doing here? Genetic power is the most awesome force the planet's ever seen, but you wield it like a kid that's found his dad's gun.
It's hardly appropriate to start hurling generalizations.
If I may, I'll tell you the problem with the scientific power that you're using here. It didn't require any discipline to attain it. You know, you read what others had done, and you took the next step. You didn't earn the knowledge for yourselves, so you don't take any responsibility for it. You stood on the shoulders of geniuses to accomplish something as fast as you could, and before you even knew what you had, you patented it and packaged it and slapped it on a plastic lunchbox, and now you're selling it. You want to sell it. Well,
I don't think you're giving us our due credit. Our scientists have done things which nobody's ever done before.
yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
Condors. Condors are on the verge of extinction. If I was to create a flock of condors on this island, you wouldn't have anything to say.
No, hold on. This isn't some species that was obliterated by deforestation or the building of a dam. Dinosaurs had their shot, and nature selected them for extinction.
I simply don't understand this Luddite attitude, especially from a scientist. I mean, how can we stand in the light of discovery and not act?
Oh, what's so great about discovery? It's a violent, penetrative act that scars what it explores, what you call discovery. I call the rape of the natural world.
Well, the question is, how can you know anything about an extinct ecosystem? And therefore, how could you ever assume that you can control it? And you have plants in this building that are poisonous. You pick them because they look good.
But these are aggressive living things that have no idea what century they're in, and they'll defend themselves violently if necessary.
Dr. Grant, if there's one person here who could appreciate what I'm trying to do.
The world has just changed so radically, and we're all running to catch up. I don't want to jump to any conclusions, but look. Dinosaurs and man, two species separated by 65 million years of evolution, have just been suddenly thrown back into the mix together, how can we possibly have the slightest idea of what to expect?
I don't believe it. I don't believe it. You're meant to come down here and defend me against these characters, and the only one I've got on my side is the blood-sucking lawyer.
Thank you.
Dr. Malcolm, Grant, and Sattler tell Hammond that he has no idea what he's dealing with. Just because his company knows how to make dinosaurs isn't the same thing as knowing how to contain or control them. But Hammond is convinced that because he could, he should, and because he could, he thinks he knows what he's doing. The novel has another core to it, and it's one that's not as present in the film: horror. Horror is a core tonal element of the book, but it's more of an optional element of the film. The book is a science fiction horror novel with its brutal deaths and gruesome descriptions, while the film is a science fiction adventure film. The film retains some horror elements with Ray Arnold's severed arm and raptor jump scares, but it's more of a secondary element. The film 100% gets away with this change to this core if we apply Sam's idea and acknowledge that the horror was an element that wasn't necessary for the translation of the thematic core. With Jurassic Park as a radical adaptation, there are numerous details that were changed. John Hammond is changed from a rich, egotistical CEO billionaire to a more friendly grandpa type. There was also an entire subplot about raptors and combies secretly escaping the island. There are actually very few examples of details from the film being one-to-one with the book. Almost every detail that wasn't cut, like the river rapid sequence for instance, was changed or reinterpreted to better suit the style of film. And in many cases, these changes for certain details to film style allowed elements to surpass their book counterpart. For example, let's do a deep look and analysis of when Dr. Grant and Dr. Sattler first see a dinosaur. To the south, rising above the palm trees, Grant saw a single trunk with no leaves at all, just a big curving stump. Then the stump moved and twisted around to face the new arrivals. Grant realized he was not seeing a tree at all. He was looking at the graceful curving neck of an enormous creature rising 50 feet into the air. He was looking at a dinosaur. "My God," Ellie said softly. They were all staring at the animal above the trees. Her first thought was that the dinosaur was extraordinarily beautiful. Books portray them as oversized, dumpy creatures, but this long-necked animal had a gracefulness, almost a dignity about its movements. And it was quick. There was nothing lumbering or dull in its behavior. The sauropod peered alertly at them and made a low trumpeting sound, rather like an elephant. A moment later, a second head rose above the foliage, and then a third, and a fourth. This version of events is told in clear detail that suits its format. The book provides a good look inside the characters' minds in that moment, as well as provide clear descriptions to help the reader paint a picture in their mind, but lacks the scale and gravitas. Now let's look at the film.
I shouldn't be here. Alan, this species of Variformin's been extinct since the Cretaceous period. I mean, this thing is about this thing. What?
It's a dinosaur.
You did it. You crazy son of a bitch, you did it.
Look at this terrible rule book on it. Cold-bloodedness, it doesn't apply. They're totally wrong. This is a warm-bodied creature.
This thing doesn't live in a swamp.
This thing's got, what, a 25, 27-foot neck?
A Brachiosaurus 30.
We're gonna make a fortune with this place.
How fast are they?
Well, we clocked the T-Rex at 32 miles an hour.
T-Rex?
Mm-hmm.
You said you've got a T-Rex?
Uh-huh.
Say again.
We have a T-Rex.
Oh.
Put your head between your knees.
Dr. Grant, my dear Dr. Sattler, welcome to Jurassic Park.
This is one of the most iconic scenes in the film, and it exemplifies how the art of filmmaking can surpass the written word of books. The actors' facial expressions and reactions to seeing a dinosaur speaks 1,000 words. Their minds are blown with shock and awe that they could barely articulate their feelings, and Grant nearly faints. The cinematography is also masterful in this scene, where it builds up the reveal by first showing the character's reaction to the dinosaur, rather than the dinosaur itself. The cinematography at multiple points highlights the scale of the dinosaur with wide shots that show the massive scale of the dinosaur, as well as low-angle shots which provide a human perspective of feeling small in the presence of a massive dinosaur. The sound design for the dinosaur itself, with the dinosaur eating and the sounds it makes, feels like we're watching an animal that feels like it's really there. The icing on top with this scene is the beautiful score by John Williams, which adds an extra layer of beauty and awe to this visually remarkable scene. The film, in almost every way, is different than the book, but in almost every case, it's different in a way that gives the book's details new life in the translated format. And I think that is important as to why Jurassic Park is a radical adaptation. The shift from horror to adventure changes how we first see dinosaurs. If you were to write a one-sentence description of both the book and the film, Island of Dinosaurs, Dinosaurs Escape, Chaos and Death, the two versions have the same base, but the layers put on top of that base is where the differences become radical. With the exception of Malcolm, every character in the film has a different description and/or motivation. The thematic core is the same, but the way it's communicated is different. If Point A was arriving on Isla Nublar and Point B was escaping it, the journey from Point A to Point B in both versions are wildly different. Even when you reach Point B, things continue to be different. The book ends ominously with Isla Nublar destroyed, but the fear that some dinosaurs made it to the mainland is still looming, while the film ends with hope and calm victory of survival. So to recap, Jurassic Park is a radical adaptation that moves beyond the concerns of fidelity to tell the same story in a unique way that still adheres to the core of the source material. The film communicates the themes and moral philosophies of the book while also managing to shift the original tone. The film also makes numerous changes from the source material to make use of the advantages of film storytelling. Jurassic Park manages to be a radical adaptation that is so different from its original book version while also being so similar to it at the same time. Thanks for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this video essay on the adaptational nature of Jurassic Park.